My name is Michael Harrison, and at 62, I've learned that some silence is being louder than words. For 2 decades, my son David treated me like a ghost. No calls, no visits, no acknowledgement that I, millionaire, existed. But the moment news of my business success hit the local papers, suddenly, I was family again. Christmas invitation should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like the opening move in a game I'd been preparing to win for 20 years. There are moments in life that don't just happen. They settle in your bones and stay there, waiting. That night at David's house was one of them. The way the warm light from his chandelier poured over the dining table, the way every fork and glass seemed perfectly placed for a celebration, the way their smiles, wide, ruthless, were really just masks, stretched tight over greed. I could see it, feel it hanging in the air, like smoke. And I had been waiting 20 years for exactly this moment.
Nia. But to understand why I stood there, coat still on, hand steady while they waited, threatened. You need to know what those 20 years looked like from my side of the silence. Part 1. The call that changed everything. It started like most endings do, with a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was the first week of December, cold enough in Cleveland that the air bit at your lungs the moment you stepped outside. The sun had been down for hours, and I'd just settled into prescribing evening routine, a simple dinner, a glass of red wine, and the quiet hum of my old embraced keeping the December chill at bay. The phone rang, cutting through the comfortable breathed silence of my kitchen. At first I thought about letting it, independent, go to voicemail. These days, the numbers that lit up my caller ID were rarely anyone I wanted to talk to. Telemarketers, wrong numbers, the occasional old acquaintance who wanted to catch up but really just wanted something. But then I saw the name, David Carter. Weak. For a moment, I thought it must be a mistake. My thumb hovered over the answer button, my heart doing something between racing and stopping completely. 20 years of nothing, and now this. I could feel the weight of every birthday card returned unopened, every Christmas that passed Chrome in silence, every attempt at contact that had hit a wall of indifference. I answered, "Dad?" That voice hit me like finding an old photograph you didn't know you'd kept. Same tone, older now, but with that familiar undercurrent, Non who'd never quite name when he was younger. A mix of charm and calculation that had served him well in his business dealings. I swallowed once before speaking. "This is unexpected." "Yeah, well," he gave a little laugh, the same one he used when questionnaire was 12 and trying to talk his way out of trouble. "It's been too long. Sarah and I were thinking it might be nice to have you over for Christmas dinner. You know, family time." Family time. Yeah. New words landed in my chest like a stone thrown into still water. He'd spent 2 decades making sure I didn't have any. "That's so?" I asked, my tone as flat as the ice, coating my windows. He filled the silence quickly, the way salesmen do when they sense hesitation. "Yeah, Sarah's been talking about it for weeks. She's making her famous prime rib. The kids will be there, Emma and Tyler. It would mean a lot." I didn't answer right away. I let him talk, let him keep building this image of a warm family gathering like a contractor dressing up a house with bad bones. Then he slipped it in, almost casually, the way people do when they're tangled trying to make something sound unimportant. "And you know, I heard you've been doing Misunderstand lately. That big, pure, simple opportunity, wrapped inside with a Christmas bow." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the frost crawling across my kitchen window like delicate fingers. The patterns reminded me of the lies people tell themselves when they want something badly enough. "Doing well enough," I said. "I'll be there." Then, after a pause just long enough for him to wonder what I meant, I added, "And I have a surprise for you. Set and lead again, softer this time. The sound of a man who thinks he's just closed a deal. That's great, Dad. Really great. Can't wait. We hung up and the kitchen felt different asleep after that call. Like the air itself had shifted. Like the temperature had dropped a few more degrees. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Thick and steady. Settling on the quiet street. Unresolved with the kind of silence that makes you think the world is holding its breath. On the table in front of me, my coffee had gone cold. I pushed it aside and pulled closer the manila folder I'd been working on for months. Inside, bank statements, property records, printouts of social media posts, financial documents, and a few photographs I'd taken myself during my own quiet investigation. The plan hadn't started with David's call. It had started long before that, back when I realized that shedding's the best way to answer 20 years of silence is with patience, preparation, and the kind of precision that comes from having nothing left to lose. That night I stayed at the kitchen table after the call ended. The clock on the wall ticked with metronomic precision, marking each second of the time I'd spent building towards this moment. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with David in person, 2 decades earlier in a house that no longer belonged to me, when he'd made his choice undertake clear in words that still echoed in the quiet spaces of my memory. The thought about the birthdays where I'd bought gifts that were never opened, the Christmas cards I'd sent, termint that came back marked "Return to Sender" in red ink that felt like a slap. I thought about the winters I'd spent alone, the only sound in the house, pressures the wind rattling windows, that seemed to mock the emptiness of rooms that had once held laughter. And I thought about how quickly that 20-year silence had ended the moment money entered the picture. I got up, walked to the sink, and poured the cold coffee down the drain. It tasted bitter anyway, like disappointment left too long in the cup. Then I went to the window and watched the snow pile higher on the bare branches of the oak tree in my front yard, the streetlight casting everything in a pale gold that made the world look both beautiful and slightly unreal. For a moment, I could almost see another winter, another December, when things were different. Play. That was before David learned how easy it is to erase someone from your life when they're no longer useful to you. Before I learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just elaborate self-destruction with good intentions. When I finally turned away from the window, I knew 2 things for certain. 1, David thought he was in control of whatever would happen on Christmas Day. 2, he had no idea who he was really dealing with anymore. The man who had begged for scraps of attention from his own son was gone. In his place stood someone who had learned the difference between being needed and being used. Someone who understood that the most powerful word in the English language isn't yes, it's no, spoken calmly and without explanation. That week moved slowly, the way time does when you're waiting for something you've planned down to the smallest detail. I went through my days as usual, grocery shopping, reading the morning paper, taking walks through my Cleveland married neighborhood, where the sidewalks crunched under fresh snow and the air smelled like wood smoke and winter. But underneath the routine, there was a current running quiet anticipation that made even mundane tasks feel charged with meaning. Every so often, I'd open that manila folder again, adding another piece to the cling puzzle. A bankruptcy filing here, a screenshot of a Facebook parliamentary there, a property record that told a story David probably thought no one was paying attention to. It was all part of the same picture, one I intended to show him, Amthe when the moment was right. On Christmas Eve morning, I took my time getting ready. I shaved carefully, put on the navy sweater I only once and laced up my good shoes. The trench I'd bought when my development company landed the contract that changed everything.
I wanted to look like a man who had nothing to hide and everything to gain. The drive across town was quiet, Cleveland streets lined presumption glowing with Christmas lights. Their windows fogged from the warmth inside. I could see families moving around in their living rooms, children pressed against glass waiting for something magical to happen. It reminded me of Christmases from another lifetime, when David was small and still believed his father could fix anything that was broken. David's neighborhood was one of those newer subdivisions where every house looked like it was trying just a little too hard to be impressive. His place was lit just enough to look inviting, but not enough to look expensive. The kind of careful calculation that suggested someone who understood the difference between appearing successful and actually being successful. When I pulled into his driveway, I could see shapes moving, windows. I sat in my car for a moment, just watching, letting the engine tick as it cooled. Then I stepped into the cold, the crunch of snow under loud in the stillness, and walked toward a door hadn't walked through in 20 years. David opened it before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for my headlights. "Dad!" "Skyrocket," he said, smiling like we'd been talking every week for years. "You made it. Come in, come in." Sarah was behind him, with her welcome, her blonde hair perfectly brushed, styled, and her smile as bright and sharp as December starlight. "So good to see you, Michael," she said. "You look prosperous." Unborn. Back, but not for them. "Thank you for having me." I took off my coat, noting how David's eyes lingered untouched on the quality of the fabric, the way Sarah's gaze swept arrested over my watch, subtle assessments disguised as warmth. They thought they were reading me, but I'd spent 20 years learning how to be read only when I wanted to be. "Pen, I brought something special," I said, patting the leather briefcase Harold down by the door. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, quick as a heartbeat, but long enough to confirm I already knew. They thought they were about to get exactly what they'd invited me here for. And in a way they were right, just not expected. Not even close. The house smelled of cinnamon, roasted meat, and carefully orchestrated ambition. Sarah's famous prime rib that David had bragged about over the phone. The Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, every ornament placed with the kind of mathematical precision that screamed lifestyle magazine photo shoot. Even the wrapped gifts underneath looked like they'd been arranged by someone who understood that presentation was everything. It was a house that worked overtime to announce how well its occupants were doing. But I'd spent 40 years in construction and real estate. I knew how to read the bones of a place beneath its cosmetic surgery. David took my coat with exaggerated warmth, hanging it in the closet, that embroidery of cedar and desperation. "Traffic wasn't too bad, was it?" he asked, that practiced smile never weakest. "Light," I said, my eyes already scanning room beyond him. 12 place settings, crystal glasses that caught the light like promises, linen napkins folded into tightened perfect triangles. This wasn't a cozy family dinner. This was theater, and I wasn't the only one who'd come prepared to give a performance. Sarah swept in, her perfume arriving a half a second fallow she did, pressing a wine glass into my hand before I could refuse. "Cabernet," she said sweetly. "I remember you liked red wine." I took a sip, smooth, expensive, chosen to impress rather than enjoy. And then I saw them, Emma and Tyler, my grandchildren in theory, if not in practice. They looked up briefly from their phones, offering polite smiles before sinking back into the blue glow of their screens. No curiosity, no recognition. You can't miss what you never knew existed. That little moment pulled me backward 20 years, to the night I lost David, maybe for good.
It was December 2003. Cleveland winters are sharp enough to cut through bone, but that night, I didn't feel both cold. I'd just finished shoveling our walkway, thinking about how my wife, Linda, would smile when she saw it clear for her morning commute to the insurance office where she worked. Then, David was 19 and still living at home. Though more and more of his life was spent elsewhere, with friends, with girlfriends, anywhere but in the house where his old man was slowly losing ground. Two bills that seemed to multiply like cancer cells. Money was tight. My construction business had hit one of those seasonal, slow patches that make you count every dollar twice. But I made sure the important things were covered. David's car insurance, gas money, the name brand clothes he wanted so he wouldn't look like the kid whose father was struggling. I thought that's what fathers did. Sacrifice quietly so their children could hold their heads up in a world that judged you by your shoes and your cell phone. That night I walked inside from the communicates from my boots when I heard voices in the semantics. Welcome. One was Linda's, lighter than I'd heard it in months. The other belonged to Robert Hartwell, a regional manager at her company, the kind of man who shook your hand while looking over your shoulder for someone more important to talk to. His cologne hit me before his words did. Expensive, sharp, invasive. And David's so smart, Linda was saying. He could do so much more with the right influence. Michael works hard, Robert said diplomatically. But stability's important too. Security. I can offer that. Flame stepped into the doorway. Linda's face froze mid-laugh. Robert didn't even look surprised, as if he'd been expecting this moment and had already decided how it would go. What's going on, Crimson, though the answer was already fallen in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had been burning longer than I'd realized. Linda straightened, her voice suddenly businesslike, as if she were delivering a quarterly report instead of dismantling a marriage. We're making some changes, Michael. I'm moving in with Jatvards. Robert and David's coming with us. My eyes found my son leaning against the counter with his arms crossed like he was watching a movie he'd already seen. David? He looked at me then, and there was no hesitation, FPS in his eyes, no conflict or doubt, just cold calculation. Mom's right, Dad. You've been stuck. Always saying things will get better, but they never do. I'm tired of waiting. That hit harder than any punch could have. I'd worked overtime, skipped meals, worn the same winter coat front line so he could have what he wanted. And here he was, calling me stuck, calling my efforts inadequate, calling my love insufficient. Linda's voice softened, but it was just another tactic. Honey poured over broken front lines. It's better this way, Michael. Robert has connections into a good internship program. Real money, real opportunities. You can visit. Visit. My own son, reduced to supervised visitation, like a divorced father with no custody rights. I wanted to fight it. I wanted to shake some sense into him, make him remember all the time born I'd been there when he needed me, but the truth was written in his face as clearly as numbers on a bank statement. David had already made his choice. The boy who used to climb into my lap with scraped knees and broken toys had chosen money over memory, opportunity over loyalty. Crimson came fast. Heirs came fast. Linda got the house, the car, and David's allegiance. I, apartment, with thin walls, and the sound of strangers' lives bleeding through the drywall, like water stains you can't paint over. The first Christmas after, I mailed David a gift, a book, Exure, something we talked about when he was younger and still thought his father's opinions mattered. It came back, unopened, returned to sender, stamped penchant, that felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. I tried again the next year. Same result. By the third year, I stopped sending anything. 12 years of silence, the occasional filtered through mutual acquaintances, David's graduation, his marriage to Sarah, the birth of his children, his various business ventures, that always seemed to start with great fanfare and end in quietly closed doors. Dad? David's voice snapped me back to the present, to the Christmas Eve that had been 20 years in the making.
You okay?
You looked far away.
Just remembering, I said, my tone even as lake ice. Sarah leaned closer, that rehearsed smile back submerged. We're just glad you're here. It means so much. 20 years, I said quietly, letting the number hang in the air like an accusation. But something flickered behind her eyes, a brief recognition that this conversation might not go exactly as planned. David clapped his hands lightly, as if changing the subject, unnamed, was as simple as changing the channel. Come on, let's eat. Dinner was all polished conversation and practiced laughter, the kind of social ballet that people perform when they're working towards something. Between bites of prime rib, which was admittedly quite good, David kept steering the conversation toward opportunities, market timing, and investment strategies. I recognized the language. It was the same tone Robert Hartwell had used 20 years earlier. The confident patter of an ambiguity who believed his own sales pitch. Sarah played her part perfectly, asking leading questions presumption my recent success, dropping hints about their admissions, ventures, their plans, their vision for the future. The children ate quietly, occasionally looking up from Sniper to register that adults were talking about boring things like money and business. At one point, David leaned toward me, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Dad, after dinner, I want to show you something. A project I've been working on. Big potential, minimal risk. I think you'll be very interested. I gave him the same neutral smile I'd perfected during 40 years of dealing with contractors who promised the moon and delivered cardboard. I'm sure it's fascinating. The other guests, Sarah's parents, a few neighbors, David's business partner who met, whose name I immediately forgot, played their roles in this carefully orchestrated evening. Everyone was pleasant, everyone was interested in Racted's success, everyone seemed to think restless years of silence could be erased with good wine and better manners. Dessert came and went. The dining room slowly emptied as people moved to the living room with their coffee and after-dinner drinks. But David caught my eye and nodded toward his home office, a small room off the main hallway decorated with the kind of motivational posters that successful people buy when they want to feel more successful. Dad, could we talk privately for Rockefeller Minute? Sarah followed us, closing the door behind her teammates with the soft click of a woman who had been planning this moment as carefully as I had. Han, David sat forward in his leather chair, elbows on his knees, putting on the same intense expression he'd probably practiced in the mirror. So here's the deal, Dad. We're raising capital, for a new venture. Tech-based, cutting-edge stuff. Artificial learning, the whole package. With the Remini Fund, we could triple our investment, combating within 18 months. Sarah's voice slid in like silk over steel. We thought, since you've been so successful, thrilled lately, maybe you'd want to be part of something really big, something that could set the whole family up for generations. There it was, not an invitation to Christmas dinner, an invitation to become their personal ATM. Not a reconciliation with a son who'd realized he missed his father, a business proposition from a man who'd realized he needed his father's money. I let the silence stretch, watching the firelight flicker across faces. The flames cast dancing shadows on the wall, and for a moment they looked like what they were, people whose masks were starting to slip. I did bring something for you, I said finally, reaching for the leather asbestos I'd carried in from the car.
Bronze it lit up like children on Christmas morning, bright with greed and barely itement. Sarah actually leaned forward in her chair, as if proximity would somehow make her more deserving of whatever generosity I was about to display. I opened the briefcase slowly, deliberately, enjoying the way they held then their breath. But instead of the check they were expecting, instead of the investment fabrics they probably already spent in their heads, I pulled out a stack of manila folders and set them on David's desk with the soft thud of truth landing on polished wood. "Your Christmas surprise," I said. Sigenti's smile wavered, then thinned like ice in spring. "What is this?" Remind her first folder across the desk. Start with the top one. He opened it, still hopeful enough to think maybe it was some kind of contract, something official that would retch with his signature on a very large check. His eyes scanned the page, then widened, the way a dashboard lineback lights up when the engine starts to fail. "Chapter 11, he said, the words scraping out of Isley's throat like gravel. This is Cranslate. 18 months old, I said calmly. Your business, partners, last company, dissolved with a 6-figure trail of unpaid debts. Your signature is in the appendix, page 8. He didn't turn page 8. His jaw was too busy clenching and unclenching, trying to find words that thick wouldn't come. Sarah reached for the document, then stopped when I slid the next folder forward. Exercise tax notices, I said. Your address. You're 4 months behind. There's still time to catch up, but not much. Sarah's carefully tamed composure began to crack like paint in the sun. You had no right to. Public records, I said. Everyone has the rhyme to look. Most people just don't bother. I laid down another folder. Personal credit utilization across 6 cards. Cash advances totaling $43,000 in the last 8 months. Minimum payments only. Interest compounding daily. Stop, David said. But I didn't. I set the folder in a neat line with the others and watched him for a moment. He looked like Robert Hartwell in that instant, the same thin anger that didn't know where to go when charm failed, the same desperate calculation ambiguous of a man watching his options narrow in real time. Why are you doing this? Climbing without prayed permission. To embarrass me? On Christmas? I exhaled slowly, the way you do when you're restrain something to someone who really should have figured it out on their own. You invited me here to perform, son. I'm just showing you what you rehearsed for. Sarah found her voice then, sharp with indignation. This is cruel, Michael. You don't understand the pressure we've been under, the challenges. Complied or stand pressure, I said. I just don't confuse tightened it with permission to lie to people who trust you. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Sparks rose briefly and vanished like dying hopes. I reached into the briefcase one more time, not for another folder, but for a plain white envelope, printed with David's name, written across the front, in my careful handwriting. I held it for a moment, thinking about the night in 2003, when he'd chosen security over loyalty, opportunity over family. Flooring, he'd taught me that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just self-destruction with good intentions. When do you remember, I said now, when you were 16 and wanted those limited edition sneakers, the ones that were sold out everywhere? You called 6 stores, hit dead ends, threw the phone down, and walked away. He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the changed direction. I spent the next 5 nights after work calling every outlet store between here and Cincinnati. Drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to pick up the last pair in your size. You opened that box on Christmas morning and didn't even look up. Just put them on and went outside to show your friends. David swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? Because you learned something that day, I said. You learned that autonomous you turned your back on me, I'd run faster to catch up. That if you were cold to me, I'd warm myself trying to earn your approval. That's on me. I trained you badly. The white envelope across the desk. Tonight, I'm retraining both of us. Now, David stared at the envelope like it might burst into flames if he touched it. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, opened it with his thumb, and read. The color drained constructs on a slow, precise schedule, like someone turning down Turk, a dimmer switch. Sarah leaned in. What is it? Clang, he didn't answer. He handed her the letter with fingers that had forgotten how to hold things steady. She read, her mouth opening and closing like a fish trying to breathe air. No, she said finally. You didn't. I did, I said simply. The bank was tired of your missed payments and empty promises. I'm a cash buyer, Sarah. They were happy to sell me your mortgage at a discount and get back to their holiday party. You bought our house? David's voice was barely a whisper. The debt, yes. The mortgage. The responsibility. Composure finally shattered completely. This is extortion. No, I said softly. This is housekeeping. Recognized you couldn't manage, I'm offering to manage it for you. David's hands were flat on the desk now as if he was trying to keep filmmakers from spinning off its axis. What do you want? Other folder from the briefcase, this one thinner than the others. Inside, one thick, one elegant. I placed the thick stack on the left, the elegant one on the right. I said, tapping the left stack, is the long way. Continued Bartwency, public foreclosure proceedings, sheriff's sale, moving trucks, neighbors who read the paper. You'll be financially recovered by the time Emma starts college, and Tyler is explaining to his therapist why Christmas makes him anxious. In and out. Somewhere in the house, laughter drifted in from Pristep Womb, where the other guests were still playing their parts in a dinner party that had become something else entirely. Hiss, I said, tapping the right stack, is the short way. Deed in lieu of for. You sign, I file, you walk away without a bankruptcy on your record. I assume the debt, you find a rental you can brush, and your children don't have treff attention at the bus stop. Blackmail, that's not a gift, Sarah said bitterly. It is to them, I said, tilting my head toward the point hallway where the shadows of my grandchildren were visible just beyond the partly open door. David pressed the heels of his palms into his eyes, then let them fall. When he looked at me, he looked small, like the chain, like the teenager who wanted too expensive shoes, like the young man who thought he could trade his father for a better model and never pay a price. Gangnam. Unauthorized, his voice barely audible. Why are you doing this to us? Unfinished? Not doing this to you, David? I'm doing this for me. Revenge, he said. Clarity, I corrected. Revenge is loud and messy. This is quiet and clean. Traer straightened in her chair, gathering whatever dignity she'll salvage from the wreckage of her evening. We can fight this. We have legal options. You do, I agreed. You can spend money you don't have on lawyers who will rightfully tell you to sign the deed in lieu. Or you can sign it tonight while the prime rib is still Wong and tell your guests you maul plumbing issue and everything's handled. Her eyes flashed with something between anger and desperation. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? Select us, just trim to stop humiliating myself, I said. There's a difference. The papers like they might rearrange themselves into something more palatable if he stared long enough. What do you want from me, Dad? Really, Tell me what perpetrated. I took a breath, held it, let it go slowly. This was blind. I'd been building toward for 20 years. Not revenge, not punishment, but something cleaner and final. More final than either. Distance, I said. That's all. Sign patent the deed, and I won't pursue the back property taxes. I won't call your other investors. I won't contact your business partners about the discrepancies in your quarterly reports. I will not show up at your door uninvited again. I paused, making sure he understood the terms completely. In return, you will not call me when you hear rumors about my success. You will not send messages through mutual acquaintances. You will not use the word family, like a crowbar, to pry open doors I've closed. Deadlock, he flinched, as if I'd slapped him. Pamela, I continued, you will tell your children nominated the truth about me, not the saint version you use when you need something, not the villain version that makes you feel better about your choices. The truth. Their grandfather is a man who made mistakes, who loved his son more than his son loved him back, and who finally learned the difference between being generous and being used. Kang silence that followed had weight to it, the kind you could measure in heartbeats and shallow breaths. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. The children, maybe, or one of the guests looking for a loan. Life continuing its ordinary business, while we conducted the extraordinary business of finally telling the truth. We can't just move, Sarah said, but softer now, the fight leaking out of her voice like air from a punctured tire. The kids, their school, their friends. Then act quickly, I said. Choose the smaller pain while you still can. David reached for the pen on his desk, held it like it weighed more it should. For a moment, something unguarded showed in experience. Confusion, maybe, or a kind of grief you only let yourself feel when you think no one is watching. We signed his name. The pen left a groove in the paper deep enough to feel with your fingertip. Sarah stared at him, then at me, then back at the signed document. She signed too, her signature smaller and thermier than his, but legally binding all the same in. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and closed it with the satisfaction of a man finishing a job that had taken far too long to complete. Thank you, I said, and I meant it, not for giving me what I wanted, but for allowing all of us to stop pretending this was about anything other than money and the ways it can poison the places where love used to live. What now? Go back to your guests, I said. You tell them there was a small family matter that needed handling, and it's resolved. You finish understandably. Tomorrow, you start looking for a place to rent in. Monday, my attorney will call yours to make sure the transition goes smoothly. And you, what do? I go home, I said. And I sleep better than I have in 20 years. When I opened the office door, the heat and noise from the rimming room rolled in like a wave. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the comfortable murmur of breached who had no idea their host's world had just shifted on its axis. I stepped into it and felt like a man walking out of a storm into ordinary weather. Emma was standing just outside the door, her hands wrapped around a glass of sparkling cider, like she was anchoring herself to something solid. She moved aside as I passed, and our eyes met for just a second. Hers were curious, not cruel, and she gave me a small, serious nod, the kind only children can manage without looking ridiculous. Okay? One of the guests asked brightly as I walked through the living room. Sarah's mother, I thought, based on the similarity around prescriptions and the way she held her wine glass like a scepter. Everything's fine, I said, and it was true. Fine doesn't mean easy. It means finished. I retrieved my coat from the closet, felt the cedar smell settle, cur, into the wool like the memory of a house I'd never live in. David didn't follow me to the door. Sarah didn't call my name. No one offered coffee for the road or asked if I wanted to stay longer. Perfect. It meant the performance was over and we could all go back, prejudice, to being who we really were instead of who we'd been pretending to be. Outside, the night had sharpened. Snow fell in fat, lazy flakes that took their time choosing where to land. My breath bloomed and vanished in the cold air as I stood on the porch for a moment, looking back at the yellow squares of their windows. Each one was a small stage where some version of family was still being performed, but I felt no urge to tear restrained down the curtain. I'd done what I came to do. At my car, I brushed snow off the windshield electric with my sleeve and started the engine. The radio came alive mid-carol Silent Night, and I almost laughed. Sometimes you get exactly the soundtrack you need, whether you pick the station or not. The drive home was quiet. Cleveland's streets mostly empty, except for the occasional car carrying people to or from their own family obligations. The city looked clean under its blanket of snow, like someone had reset it submerged only and given everyone a chance to start fresh. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. My house looked smaller than David's, older, less carefully maintained. But it was mine in a way that his had never really been his, and there was something to be said for owning your own problems instead of mortgaging them to people who might call in the debt when you least expected it. Inside, I hung up my coat and loosened Twitter my tie. The house, or smaller, just more honest. Like Remian had been holding its breath for 20 years and could finally exhale. I made myself a sandwich from leftover turkey and stood at the kitchen window eating it, watching the snow pile up the branches of the oak tree in my backyard. The tree was older than David, older than my marriage to Linda, older than most of the mistakes and all of the lessons I'd learned from them. My phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. Saw the lights go out at David's early. Hope Christmas went the way you planned it. Recognized the number, but I knew who it was. Small parliamentaries have long memories and short patience for people who forget where they came from. I typed back. It went exactly the way it needed to. Flooded thoughts appeared, then disappeared. Then, good. Smuggling, some people deserve to learn what they've been taking for granted. I turned off the phone and finished my sandwich. Some conversations don't need to be continued, just acknowledged and filed, away in the part of your mind that keeps track of which people understand the difference between justice and revenge. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke before dawn I made coffee at my kitchen table with the newspaper, reading about other people's problems while mine settled into the shape they were supposed to have all along. My phone rang at 9:17. The caller ID said Frank Morrison, my attorney, a man who understood that the best legal work happens quietly and leaves everyone involved with something they can live with. "McMahon," he said, "I've got the paperwork ready for filing." Deed in lieu processes smoothly when both parties cooperate. Conga cooperated, I said. "Good. I'll file this afternoon. You have clear title by New Year's. What do you want to do with the property?" I'd been thinking about that question since I'd bought the mortgage 6 months earlier. Put it on the market. Price it fairly. They've got 60 days to find something else. And if they can't, they'll figure it out, I said. They're very good Eipart turbulence things out when they have to. Franklin chuckled. You're not as cold as you pretend to be, Michael. I'm exactly as Rahim as I need to be, I said. But you're right. I'm not cruel. There's a difference. We hung up, and I spent the rest of Christmas submerged day the way I'd spent the previous 19, quietly, without fanfare, but with something I hadn't had before, the satisfaction of knowing that the scales had finally balanced. 6 months later, I was standing in my kitchen, making coffee, when I saw the moving truck pull up across the street, a young couple with a toddler, laughing as they directed the movers with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from buying your first house with money you actually have. David and Sarah had found a rental on the other side of town, a smaller place according to the friends had in common, but clean and affordable, abandonment, and close to a good school district. David had taken a job in a manufacturing plant, working in their accounting department. Sarah was teaching part-time at a daycare center, honest work that paid honest wages and let them sleep without wondering which bill collector would call next. Emma and Tyler had adjusted the way children do, completely and without the dramatic angst their parents had predicted. They'd made new friends, joined new activities, and seemed to understand instinctively that their family story was being rewritten in a way that was less glamorous but more sustainable. We'd seen them once at the grocery store, all 4 of them together in the cereal aisle. David looked older, thinner, but there was something in his posture that hadn't been there before, a kind of tired honesty that suited him better than the polished confidence he'd worn like an expensive suit that never quite fit right. Our eyes met across the store. He nodded, and I nodded back. No words, no drama, just 2 men acknowledging blackmaileries and not with reconciliation, but with the much quieter gift of mutual understanding. That night, I'd found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a Christmas card. Not the expensive kind Sarah used to send to everyone on their holiday list, but a simple one you could sang at any drugstore. The message inside was written in David's careful handwriting. Strengthening you for teaching me the difference between wanting something and deserving it. The kids are doing well. So are we. D. I'd kept the card on my kitchen table for a week, reading it every morning with my coffee, not because I needed the indication, but because it reminded me that sometimes the best gifts are the ones that cost the giver something they didn't want to pay. Now watching the new neighbors carry boxes into the house that used to hold so much disappointment, I felt something I had in quotations, hope. Not for David and me, that ship had sailed 20 years ago and found its proper harbor in mutual respect and careful distance. But hope for the idea that people can learn, that consequences can teach, that love doesn't always have to be unconditional to be real. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who had gotten my number directory when she needed help with a math project her parents couldn't solve. Confiscated, I made on a roll again. Unofficial, thought you'd want to know. Chitin, I typed back, proud of you. Hard work pays off. As the same thing, close Chitin. Dad, weird how that works. I smiled and put the phone away. Some lessons take 20 years to learn, but when they finally stick, they stick for good. That evening, I made dinner and ate it, micking, at my kitchen table, while the sun set behind the oak tree in my backyard. The tree was budding now, getting ready for another of growth, another season of providing extra Aaron on anyone who needed it. I'd learned something in the 20 years since David walked out of my life. You can't make someone love you, but you can stop making it easy for them to use you. You can't force a reconciliation, but you can insist on honesty. You can't control what other people do with the lessons you teach them, but you can make sure the lessons are worth learning. Dinted from the sky, I washed my dishes and put them away. Simple tasks that felt like prayers, ordinary moments that added ching up to a life that finally made sense.
Number imprisoned rang one more time. The caller ID said David Carter.
When I thought about letting it go to voicemail, then changed my mind.
Hello, David.
Sharpen. A pause.
I was wondering...
Would you like to have coffee sometime?
Just coffee. No agenda, no anything else.
Just to talk. I looked out my window at the oak tree, at the house across the street, where new stories were beginning, at the reflection of my own threatened in the glass, older, wiser, and finally at peace with the man looking back at me. "I'd like that," I said. "But let me buy. I clang afford it now." He laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in 20 years.
Okay, Dad, it's a deal.
We made plans to meet the following Tuesday at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, where we could see each other clearly without the distortion of expectation or obligation. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, and thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that allows the future to be different. I thought about grace, not unearned mercy, but the space between action and consequence, where people can choose to be better than they were. And I thought about love, how it changes when you stop trying to prove it and start trying to live it. The house settled around me with the small sounds old houses make when they're content. The whisper of warm air through the vents, the gentle creak of wood adjusting to the day's temperature changes, the soft hum of appliances, butterflies doing their faithful work. 20 years of silence had ended not with a bang, but with a conversation about coffee, and the quiet understanding that some gifts are worth waiting for, even if they don't look anything you thought you wanted. Outside, snow began to fall again. Not dramatic snow of that Christmas Eve 6 months ago, but the gentle kind that threatens everything lightly and makes the world look like it's been given a second chance. Turned off the lights and headed upstairs, leaving the house to its peaceful business of sheltering the sleep of a man who had finally learned the difference between being needed and being respected, between being used and being loved. Tomorrow would bring coffee with my son, not the boy who had broken my heart 20 years ago, but the man who had learned to line back his own weight and was ready to try carrying a conversation with his father. It wouldn't fix everything, wouldn't erase the years all the wounds we'd inflicted on each other, but it would be honest. And sometimes, after 20 years of lies, half-truths, and carefully constructed facades, honesty is the most powerful force in the world. We slept better that night than I had in decades and dreamed of oak trees that grew strong because they learned to bend without breaking, and of fathers and sons who found their way back to each other, not through forgiveness, but through the much harder remember of earning each other's respect. Peace, I realized, wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the presence of truth, spoken clearly and without no longer relinquished to beg for permission to be heard.